Hello and welcome to the Unnamed Sports Show. I am your host, of course, Joshua Griffith, here on the Sports Talk Line Network. So I have a fantastic show lined up for you today, as I'm going to be joined by Canucks writer for The Athletic, the one and only Jeff Paterson. So Canucks are coming off their week bye. I wanted to chat with him, get caught up with what's happening with the team, and kind of look forward to ahead and back at how the season's been so far. So before we get into things, make sure to hit that like button. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And of course, if you don't already, subscribe to the Sports Talk Line YouTube channel. So without further ado, here is my interview with. All right, I'm so happy to be joined now by my next guest, writer for The Athletic, co-host of the Vancast, contributor on The Nation, and on Sekeres Price, the one and only Jeff Paterson. Thanks for joining me today, Jeff.
Yeah, happy to be here, and I'm glad you sort of reminded me of all the things that I've got going. I need a checklist these days because you're right. Trying to piece together my work life once again after the demise of 1040 and finding some ways to contribute and sort of keep my voice out there.
I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that we're really excited that your voice is still out there in so many spots that we can hear you dissect the Canucks and talk about the team.
I appreciate that.
So first off, obviously, want to make sure you and your family are staying safe and healthy. We continue to see numbers kind of rise a bit here.
Yeah, we have managed to avoid COVID, knock on wood. For us, the bigger issue over the weekend was the stabbing here in Lynn Valley, which was 4 blocks from our house. And my wife and my daughter were across the street when it happened. And I had been there at that time the day before. So just a crazy world we live in. And it's been a lot to process. But no, the family is, we're happy, we're healthy. And again, it's been a bit of an eventful year, obviously, with job loss, but doing all we can to piece that back together now.
Good. Glad to hear. So, the team that you are covering in so many of these different avenues, the Canucks sit 16, 18, 3 and 35 points. They're only 2 back of the final playoff spot, but obviously they have some games ahead of Montreal. What do you make of the team so far after 37 games?
Yeah, don't get fooled. That is an optical illusion, to say the least. The points in the standings column. It's obviously the win percentage is the real indicator there, and they have dug themselves just too big a hole. You can't have a month where you go 2-9-2 like they did in February and think that you've got enough time to claw your way out. And even in an 82 game season, I think that would have been a challenge. But in a compressed schedule like this one with 56 to go. That was just a month that I don't think they'll be able to overcome. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of points in their back pocket, they look like they're close to Montreal, but 2 back of Montreal. The Habs have 5 games in hand, and who knows when Montreal is going to play next, given the week that they had with COVID. And you think about that, like if Montreal was to run the table and win those 5 games in hand, it wouldn't be 2, it would be 12 points in front of the Vancouver Canucks. So, the Canucks are in a predicament now where they probably have to go something like 15-4 over their final 19 games. And it's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You saw a month of March here where Thatcher Demko stepped up and played out of his mind, and it allowed the Canucks to string some wins together. And that was good. I had no appetite whatsoever to go through another month in March like we all witnessed in February. There was, just too much time left in the season to have to deal with a team that had gone completely over the cliff. So, I'm glad for the guys in that room that they were able to move it in the right direction. Most of it on the back of Thatcher Demko. Besser's had a good and consistent season, and there've been others, obviously. But I just think that they fell too far behind the pack. They put themselves in that position. And so now with these final 19 to go, they're never going to give up on a season. That's not in the DNA of players or coaches. So they'll continue to try to play hard. But, I think people haven't really looked at the schedule either, that after this home game against Calgary, coming out of the week break, they're on the road for 7 in a row. And this isn't like going into 7 hostile buildings in normal times. It's not about the environment you play in. It's more about being away for 7 in a row when you're confined to a hotel and that's all you can do. Just the grind mentally on these players to try to play games, but they can't, yeah, they're allowed to go outside for a walk, but they can't duck into a coffee shop. They can't go to a drugstore. Like the rules are so severe that the only way they're able to play these games is if these guys adhere to the rules that have been laid out for them. And that means doing next to nothing when you're out on the road. So a 7-game road trip, that's essentially 2.5 weeks of, lockdown in your hotel room, except when you get to play the games. Like that would, I think, take a toll on anybody. So the month of April is not going to be kind to the Canucks. 11 of 15 away from Rogers Arena. And I would think at some point in the month of April, their fate will be sealed as far as missing the playoffs goes this season.
That's, it's interesting you mentioned that too, about the team, and you cover the team, and in normal times you were with the team traveling before COVID hit, obviously. And then is that something that you see a lot of? Like, is it really important between the players to get that, that little time to go out for dinner, to go out and wind down? Like they just had a week off here or 5 days now. And like you said, they're not able to do that much.
Yeah. And, I think part of living the life they do is getting to go around North America and visit these great cities. And, every guy's a little bit different, but yeah, I mean, they're hockey players, but they're human beings. And so whether it's just going on an off day or a practice day and getting out and checking out some of the sites, and as you said, getting to different restaurants. And look, they've got the financial wherewithal. They can check out some of the best restaurants in any of these cities. And it's just not the same for them. And so, I'm sure they're like everybody. I mean, they can see a light at the end of the tunnel now as far as COVID's concerned, but, now is the time to make sure that we are all adhering to all these rules so that we get to the end of the tunnel as quickly as possible. So, I don't ever want to say that this year is a complete throwaway, because ultimately somebody's going to win the Stanley Cup like Tampa did. And if you're a veteran player, like you don't have many kicks at the can left. And so I'm not seeing veteran players just on the Vancouver Canucks, around the league. Like you can't just say, oh, COVID, we're playing under this COVID black cloud. This year doesn't matter. No, like this is one more year for veteran guys that they're going to have an opportunity to get their name on the Stanley Cup if it's not already there. So I think it does matter. It's different, obviously, with nobody in the stands and nobody buying tickets and those types of things. And hopefully we'll all be able to get back to normal. I've been fortunate enough, with a press pass to be able to go to Rogers Arena and watch the Canucks. And I don't take it for granted, because I look around and there's 6 or 8 of us in the media area. Like, there's very few people that are getting inside the doors of these NHL rinks. And it's not the same. I mean, it's great to be able to watch these guys do what they do on the ice, but part of sport at the highest level is the atmosphere, the excitement, the energy in the building. And that comes from the paying spectators. And so, yeah, it's just not the same. Even though I've been to a bunch of games, it hits you every time that there's nobody there. There's nobody watching these games. And so I want to get back to that, because I love the atmosphere and I love the energy in a full rink when the stakes matter. And, you get around to playoff time. And obviously last year they weren't played at Rogers Arena. So it's been a long time since there has been a truly meaningful, significant game with consequence played here in Vancouver. And I don't think it's going to happen this spring. And so, the wait will continue, but certainly I highly anticipate getting back to that point in time where, people can all get in, pack a rink and just enjoy themselves watching the game that they love.
It was so eerie going back to BC Place in September last year for the Whitecaps games, and just going in there. Normally there's the Southsiders, there's singing, there's chanting, there's all this, and it was just crickets. And then the players come on, you can hear everything, you can hear all the technical stuff. I mean, it's cool for that aspect, but yes, it's totally misses something like that part of sport, that camaraderie of sport. Just seeing the random guys high-fiving, they don't even know anybody, but we scored. So it's definitely been lost this year. One of the bright spots this year has been Thatcher Demko, obviously great 9.17 save percentage, and really coming to his own in the last little while. Is this something, Jeff, that you kind of saw before the bubble last year? Like, did you see the pattern being laid for him already?
I don't know if I can say that I saw him, look, he was a second round pick. I mean, you're a second round pick for a reason. People project you to be a player that's going to pan out, but we know that not all draft picks work out, and certainly not all second rounders. Then he came in and getting a chance to work with Ian Clark, but was very clearly the backup to Jacob Markstrom the last couple of seasons. But really, when you look at Thatcher Demko, his college career at Boston College, then he went, the time he spent in Utica, developed there, he has progressed. And so I'm not surprised that he has turned into the kind of goaltender that he has been here this season. Now, is he going to play at the level he did in the month of March throughout his career? No. I mean, that was unsustainable. And people pointed that out as he was delivering the Canucks to these victories. But, we all got a taste of it in the bubble last year when he was pressed into duty against Vegas and stood on his head. And so, it's there. That obviously was just a short burst in a unique situation in the bubble last summer, but the stakes were pretty high. Playoff hockey, coming in cold and doing his thing there. So I don't think that I'm surprised that he gives every sign of being a legitimate number one. I think he's been groomed for that. And the Canucks certainly hoped that was going to be the best case scenario for him. But I know at times there were people in the Canuck organization that weren't sure if he was going to develop into a guy that they could trust and lean on. And I think those fears have been allayed. And I think now he has shown that this has kind of been his coming out party. And so you're right. There have been a lot of stories in and around this Canuck team that have been underwhelming or disappointing, but Thatcher Demko was at the other end of that spectrum. And look, when you've got goaltending in the National Hockey League, you've got a chance. And the Canucks were proof of that last year. They had better goaltending than Minnesota. They had better goaltending than St. Louis. And ultimately, they had goaltending that threw a scare into the Vegas Golden Knights down to the 6-minute mark of the third period in a scoreless tie in Game 7 before the Vegas Golden Knights punched their ticket on to the next round. But it's a relatively short list of good news stories for the Vancouver Canucks this season, but Thatcher Demko is right up there near the top of that list.
Did you have any surprises negatively that you were like, wow, that really stood out in a disappointing way for me?
Through this season so far?
Yeah, so far, yeah.
Well, Jake Virtanen would have to be at the top of the list, coming off an 18-goal season and getting the contract extension and sitting with not just 4 goals, but no assists. Yeah. And, he can't use, I've been buried in the bottom 6. JT Miller started the season in the COVID protocol. Jake was there on the top line for the first couple of games. Again, he's been moved around recently back into the top 6, whether it's a showcase, whether they just felt that was the best spot for him, injuries, whatever the case. Jake Virtanen has had opportunities and it just hasn't happened. And I think I was always leery that the 18 goals might have been a high watermark for him. His season didn't end all that well last year before COVID hit. I think he'd gone 7 without a goal. He got off to a nice start last year. And then sort of the second half of the season, there wasn't a lot there. And then into the bubble, and there was very little production from him in the summer playoffs. And here we are now, healthy scratch a bunch of times and deservedly so. His play hasn't been where it needed to be. So, I would put him on that list. Tanner Pearson, again, all this trade talk around Tanner Pearson, it's been a highly disappointing season for Tanner Pearson well before the injury hit. But again, this is a guy, 21 goals a year ago. I think you had to factor in that 6 of them came into an empty net. 9 of his points last year, an empty net. Now, that speaks volumes about the trust that a coach has in a player to be in those situations late in games, protecting leads. But you also have to take that production with a little bit of a grain of salt that it inflated his numbers. So, I think it's been a disappointing season for a guy like Tanner Pearson, Adam Gaudette. The list is going to go on here. Early in the year, people were all fired up about Brandon Sutter and, this renaissance season for Brandon Sutter. Brandon Sutter's got 6 goals. 3 of them came in the same game against Ottawa when Ottawa was offering up no defense whatsoever. And it was a cool story. And it was his first NHL hat trick. And, I don't want to rain on his parade, but if we're going to look at Brandon Sutter's season in totality, Brandon Sutter had a hat trick against Ottawa. He's got 3 goals in 30 some odd other games and has 2 since the hat trick night. And one of those was into an empty net. So, you can't tell me that it has been this, back to the future kind of season for Brandon Sutter. He's got 2 assists. He's a centerman in the National Hockey League, and he's got 2 assists. So look, the bottom 6 for the Canucks has been an issue for a while. We know that, the bloated contracts. And I would say that the bottom six has been a massive disappointment yet again for the Vancouver Canucks. And the problem is that too many of those guys are under contract for next season. And we know that management's had a difficult job getting out from under those contracts or moving money. Will they handcuff the Canucks for another season? And the GM himself said, wait 2 more years. And I think he was alluding to the fact that it's going to be tough to move off some of those contracts that are hindering the Vancouver Canucks. So I would put the bottom 6 as a collective, as a big disappointment. And then individually, there have been a lot of guys that I just think more was expected of, and they simply have not delivered.
Almost the highlight for Brandon Sutter's season would have been the blizzard that he got, or the McFlurry that he got after the game.
Yeah.
So I'm joined by Jeff Paterson here on the Unnamed Sports Show. You mentioned the coach a bit. What have you thought of the job of Travis Green? I've liked what he's done, I guess, with the limited options that he has available. What did you think of his coaching so far?
Look, I thought he did his best coaching work in the bubble last summer. I thought he pushed a lot of the right buttons. It was a first look at playoff hockey for Elias Pettersson and Brock Besser and Quinn Hughes, and Bo Horvat had been there before as a rookie, but it had been a while since he had returned to the playoffs. And he was outstanding, double digits in goals. Pettersson was a point a game guy. Quinn Hughes was close to that. Besser had his moments, and in some of those series, when you look, they fell behind against Minnesota. Travis Green made some adjustments. They were able to knock off the Wild, and then they got out to the nice start against St. Louis. The Blues tied them up again. Adjustments were made. I thought Travis Green did a really nice job, and I wanted to believe that the Canucks were going to be able to pick up where they left off. And I think I believed that because their best players performed in. They were up to the challenge, and that was a really good sign for me. And then the hope was going to be that, the supporting cast would step up and sort of round out that forward group. And as we've talked about, the bottom 6 just hasn't got it done. And then you think back to the way it started for like Elias Pettersson, those first 10 games, it was bizarre. We haven't seen him in his 2 years. He made it look so easy in his first 2 years in the NHL. And there was nothing there for Elias Pettersson. He's finally got a little traction now. He's hurt, obviously, but after those first 10 games, he started to look more like his former self. But Travis Green's hands are tied. I mean, you look at his options, and again, Tanner Pearson is a top 6 forward at this stage of his career. I think on a really good team, Tanner Pearson's a little lower in the lineup, but the Canucks just don't have many options. And I think you think back to February on that Eastern road trip where they lost in Montreal and then went into Toronto and got shelled. And it got to the point where Virtanen, McHugh, and Gaudette were all healthy scratches on the same night. And essentially, to me, that was Travis Green kind of throwing his hands in the air and saying, I'm going back to Louis. I got no other options here. I'm going with Justin Bailey. I'm going with Louis Eriksson. These are the guys that, I have to play. And I think that speaks volumes about the overall talent level on the hockey club. I think it also speaks volumes that, the Canucks claim not 1, but 2 guys off the Maple Leafs off waivers, and Jimmy Vesey and Travis Boyd, and they're probably both going to find their way into the top 6 for the Vancouver Canucks here right off the bat. Now, some of that's because Pettersson and Pearson are out, but again, you're talking about a Toronto team that has all this depth. They can't keep all these guys on the roster. I think it was the right move to try to claim those types of players, low cost, low risk. But at the same time, Jimmy Vesey's looked all right in the 4 games that he's played. He works hard, but there's no bottom line. And that's just kind of, what the Canucks are, that they have to work so hard for any kind of offense. And I don't know if Jimmy Vesey is part of the big picture moving forward here. Again, I had no problem with the Canucks claiming him off waivers, but I think what you've seen is a guy that he gives it what he's got. It's just that what he's got at this stage is, it's a minimal contribution. And Travis Boyd, we haven't seen him yet in a Canuck uniform, but I'm sort of anticipating it's that same type of situation. So it's a collection. And again, this should sort of speak to management that the group that they've got is not good enough. They're better than they were in that 2-9-2 run in February, but how much better, I'm not sure. Ultimately, they're going to come up short when it comes to the playoffs. And look, I think this is an important point too. The Canucks were part of the playoffs last year in the bubble in Edmonton, but they were invited to an expanded playoff tournament. right? When COVID hit, there were 13 games to go and the Canucks were right on the playoff bubble. You can't sit and say the Canucks earned a playoff spot last year. We just don't know. They were included in an expanded playoff tournament. And so in Jim Benning's 7 years at the helm, his teams have made the playoffs once, have actually like earned a playoff spot once, and then they were included in a 2014 tournament last year. Once they got into the tournament, they did some good things. I'm not going to take that away from them, but just in terms of team building and putting together a winner that is capable of contending, Jim Benning's been on the job 7 years, and his teams have earned a playoff spot just once. And that's not good enough.
No, that's not very good percentage. And, you mentioned Jimmy VC and Travis Boyd being claimed on waivers. Something I also thought was interesting. You mentioned on the last episode of the Vancast with your co-host Thomas Drance was about JT Miller. He was a fourth line player for the Tampa Bay Lightning, for a Stanley Cup contending team. That's where the depth that the Canucks have compared to it. So I just found that really interesting.
Yeah, and I think at some point here, the bar has to be raised. The bar has been so low in this city for so long, and this frustrates me. And look, I cover this team. I grew up a fan, but sort of the fandom has been squeezed out of me. Now I cover them. I mean, it's the job that I do and I've done for a while. And so I don't live with wins and losses. My job is to watch the games, assess them, offer up opinions and thoughts. But it just feels to me like for way too long in this city, there's been no expectation on guys that play lower in the lineup. And you think back to the Willie D days and just the constant carousel of bottom six forwards that came through. And, there was no expectation on any of these guys to produce. Like, it was a good night when they held their own, didn't get scored on. And somehow that was pointed to as a success. And then you look at the Stanley Cup contenders and you look at a team like Vegas that ultimately took out the Canucks, and Alex Tuch, early in that series on a third line, kind of had his way with the Vancouver Canucks. And then you look at Tampa and what they did at the deadline and went out and basically, recreated a bottom six. And yeah, they paid a price to do it, but they also, the ends justify the means. They're holding the Stanley Cup at the end of last year's playoffs. And that's why I look at whether it's Sutter, it's Virtanen, it's Gaudette, McEwen, Beagle, Roussel. Like, it just feels like there's no expectation on any of these guys to be productive. Some of them, their role now is to kill penalties, and that shouldn't be enough to keep you in the National Hockey League. Like, your bottom six should be built with players that can play, that can contribute, that can help you win, that can give you mismatches against your opponents. And a couple of those guys probably have to kill some penalties at times as well. But, their number one skill set should not be, he's good in the faceoff circle, or this guy's a really good penalty killer. That's great, but can he play? And the answer to too many of the guys that take up spots on the regular on a nightly basis for the Vancouver Canucks is, I'm not sure that they can still play and contribute in the National Hockey League. And what the Canucks have assembled here shouldn't be the benchmark, right? Like, they can play on this team because this team's not good enough and it doesn't have the talent necessary. But like, when you look at the guys that are occupying spaces in the Canucks bottom six, how many of them would have a regular job with a legitimate Stanley Cup contender around the National Hockey League?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious to tell from the waiver wire, probably not that many.
Right.
One of the things too that you brought up too about covering the team and you're not really you can't really do the wins and losses as a media reporter. But I don't know if people understand how much easier it is to cover a team that's winning, how much easier it is to ask a goalie a question when they won 5-1 as opposed it is to ask it when they've lost 3-0.
Yeah, I get a lot of people that say, you must love this. Like, the Canucks are, buried again. And that 2-9-2 February, like, you must, you guys. No, I want to cover a good team. Trust me, I want to cover 2, 3, 4 rounds of playoff hockey. We know for a fact that the last time that there was playoff hockey in Vancouver was 2015. Canucks as a higher seed end up getting bounced by Calgary. And then, as I said earlier, last year was in the bubble in Edmonton. So, it's been coming up on 6 years since I have covered a Stanley Cup playoff game. I want to cover playoff hockey in Vancouver. I want the fans to enjoy and experience playoff hockey. in Vancouver. I want the Canucks to win a Stanley Cup for this city that I was born in and raised in. And I've got friends that have been lifelong Canuck fans. Like, I want them to experience that joy. So, don't come at me and tell me I'm loving this, that the Canucks have 2 wins in 13 games in February. It gets old in a hurry, like a real hurry. And you run out of things to ask these guys because they don't have answers. And then, the media becomes the bad guy. And people within the organization, they're looking for anybody to sort of put the blame on. And look, I'm not out there making the passes and making the misreads defensively and stuff. Like, the media is just reporting what we see. And far too often I get this, like, you guys are making this up. And, am I going to sit here and say that media members have never had an agenda or an angle? No. I mean, of course that has been the case, but I think 95% of the media people, and certainly the guys that I deal with, they go to the games, they watch the games, they're offering up an honest assessment. You don't have to agree with it necessarily. I mean, that's the beauty of what we do. It's trying to get a reaction out of people. It's, if you have a thought and an opinion and you write a column, it's not that you want everybody to agree with your column. It's you want them to read it and formulate their own opinion. And some people may not agree with you, but this idea that we like it when the Canucks are struggling, I like storylines. I cheer for good storylines. And I've made this point repeatedly on my podcast and others, that really, when you think of how dark it's been the last bunch of years, the good news stories that have been told and discussed, and Botch and I used to talk about this on the podcast all the time. When you think of the coverage that Elias Pettersson has got in his short time, Quinn Hughes bursting onto the scene. I go back to like Ryan Miller when he was in goal and the Canucks couldn't win, but there were stories written about Ryan Miller and what a good guy he was and how well he was playing. And Troy Stecher, it seemed that everybody had Troy Stecher's back. And like, there have been a ton of good news stories that have probably exceeded, truly the amount that was deserved in a market like this based on the wins and losses. But I think it's because, for the most part, people want to tell good stories and they want to see good hockey. And who's playing the good hockey for the most part? It's been those young guys of late. The young guys haven't sunk the Vancouver Canucks. They still remain the core that this team ought to build around, and I think will build around. But this organization has been let down by veterans and guys lower in the lineup. So I think there have been a ton of good news stories told about the Vancouver Canucks, and there have been a lot of good news players. This is an exceptionally talented young core. But as you've seen in Edmonton, 1 or 2 guys doesn't get you where you want to go. It's a team game, and you've got to build out around those players. And the Oilers haven't done a great job of it, and neither have the Vancouver Canucks here for the last bunch of years.
Well, Jeff, I knew this was going to happen. The time is absolutely flying by with you. So I want to switch it off the Canucks a bit and ask you some questions about yourself, if that's okay.
Fire away. If I can keep my earbuds in here.
Oh, I know. It was just like poking at them. Producer's like, you should get some like earbuds. I'm like, they don't stay in. So, you seem to absolutely love hockey. It comes out when you talk about it. It comes out when you write about it. You can see, where did that start? Where did you get your hockey or passion for hockey?
I grew up in a household with 2 older brothers, and they both played, and I wanted to do whatever they were doing. And so I think that was kind of my introduction. It's funny, neither of my parents are particularly sporty. In fact, my father, in his later years now, has become a way bigger Canuck fan than he ever was when we were kids growing up. But we played all sports in my household, and I played hockey from a young age. And I think there's a couple of factors that really kind of led me down this path for a career. One was I loved the game, and I played up sort of through midget myself. I realized that I wasn't going anywhere in terms of trying to pursue it as a career. I mean, as a young kid, sure, I was like many Canadian kids, I had the dream of, play in the NHL, but I knew that was never going to happen. And, so as I got to be 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, I kind of developed this fascination with the people on TV and on radio that were describing the games. And we grew up in a household where the radio was always on, and listened to CKNW and Jim Robson and Tom Larscheid. And it just kind of became this idea as I got a little bit older that, hey, like, I think that's something I'd love to pursue. And it seems pretty cool. And my best friend, his parents had season tickets. This started back at the Coliseum. and they had 4 seats right behind the Canucks bench, dead on center ice, 10 rows up. Like, they were incredible seats. And they were so generous. They took me to probably 10 or 12 games a year. And so, I got to go to the games and experience that as a fan. But it was funny because back in the Coliseum days, in the intermissions, my buddy would want to go and get a Coke or something, popcorn. And I would just want to go and look up at the press box and see if I could see some of the guys that I either read in the newspaper or watched on TV, because they all kind of hung out. There was this like kind of a loft there at the Coliseum, and in the intermissions, all the media guys would just kind of hang out, and you could see them from the concourse. And so that became a regular fascination for me. And it was this idea of like, I want to be up there one day. And so it all just kind of built to that. And, and then once I got into my teen years and decided that, it was something I wanted to pursue, then I kind of, from that point forward, everything I did was with an eye towards that. So, I went to UBC and I got involved in the campus radio station and did play-by-play for the Thunderbirds hockey and football and basketball. And from there, I went to BCIT and did the broadcast program, and on it went. And right out of school, was really fortunate to get my first job in Kamloops, and sort of the rest is history from there. But I've got teenage kids now that aren't sure what they want to do for a living. And I just think, man, I was lucky. I just, probably honestly, from the time I was about 10 or 12, I had a sense that this was what I wanted to pursue. And here I am all these years later.
That's really cool. So you obviously, like you said, did play-by-play for the Kamloops Blazers for 5 years from 1993 on. What was some of your best moments calling play-by-play for them?
Well, there's none better than describing a Memorial Cup win on home ice in my first year as the voice of the Blazers, with Jerome McGinley and Shane Doan and Darcy Tucker and Nolan Baumgartner and Jason Strudwick and Brad Lukowich and Tyson Nash and on and on. I mean, it was just an incredible, it really, probably the greatest junior hockey team of all time. And that was an era, that was the third of the 4 Memorial Cups that the Blazers won in a 4-year span. So when you think of how hard it is to build a contending team in junior hockey, it's like college, where players age out all the time. Like, the idea of building a contender for 1 year is incredibly difficult. And for them to win 3 of 4 years was just so off the charts insane. And for me to get the job to, when I did, they had just won the Memorial Cup in 1994. That was the second one. And they knew they'd already earned the right to be the hosts in 95. So now they're trying to win back-to-back in 3 and 4. And in a place like Kamloops, these players were absolute gods. And, they embraced by the city. I couldn't go grocery shopping. Like, I couldn't get through Safeway without people stopping me and wanting to talk about last night's game or, what the team was going to do at the trade deadline. And, it was that the coverage and the buy-in from the fan base was so incredible then. And it was great. How could you not want to work in that kind of environment? So they were just a juggernaut that first year that I was on the job. They went 52-14-6 in their 72 regular season games. Every loss Don Hay took personally. I think he truly believed that his team was good enough to run the table and win all 72 games. That was never going to happen. It was just incredible to watch the development of these guys that went on to have, in Jerome's case, a Hall of Fame NHL career. But there's so much talent on that team that, my best year was the first year. There's no doubt. Just an incredible experience, one that I'll hold near and dear forever. They weren't as good. Obviously, they had raised the bar through the roof, and it was impossible to keep it at that standard. And so my 5 years, the caliber of team started to drop a little bit. And that's not why I got out of it, but I wanted to be in the Western Hockey League calling play-by-play by the time I was 30. And here I was, I think I was 24 when I, my very first game. And as it turned out, I was out of the Western Hockey League by the time I was 30. So I had a great 5-year run. I loved it. It was a blast. I met my now wife there in Kamloops. So I look back on those years fondly, and it was a ton of fun. But at the same time, I had also always wanted to live and work but I always wanted to work in Vancouver. This is my home, and this is the market I wanted to work in and cover the Canucks. So it's worked out all right.
Yeah, so far so good. So I have a question for you. Obviously, you've probably met tons of, hockey players, famous hockey players and all that stuff, obviously. Wanted to ask you who's the most famous non-hockey player that you've met, maybe say wandering around one of the arenas after game or post game, and you kind of turn and go, whoa, hey, that's so-and-so.
Yeah. The one that jumps to mind is a few years back, my wife and I went to New York City, and it was the Canucks season ended, I want to say on like April 9th. And my job was to cover them, so I couldn't go when they were still playing. So they finished on a Saturday night. We flew out on the Sunday, which was also Masters Sunday, and I'm a big golfer and golf fan. And so on our second day in New York City, on the Tuesday, we were just out. It was a beautiful day. We were walking the streets of New York, and we just stumbled upon Sergio Garcia, who had just won the Masters 2 days before, wearing his green jacket in Midtown Manhattan, and he was making the rounds and doing all sorts of TV interviews. And it was one of these bizarre moments. And I'm not starstruck just because I've been around athletes all my life, and but it was just sort of the bizarre nature and the randomness to it all, that these side doors on a building kind of flew open, and Sergio came bounding down these stairs wearing his Masters green jacket. I knew exactly right away. I knew who it was. My wife didn't. But I was like, get the camera ready. And then I asked him hey, can I take a photo? And he couldn't have been more gracious. And we had a quick little chat, and he was moving on to the next TV appearance. But that was about as random a sort of celebrity sighting as I have been involved in. I've seen non-hockey players at hockey games. I know like Seattle Seahawks guys have come up and watched Canuck games, and there have been times where actors or musicians have been brought through the press box and that type of stuff, but nobody at that sort of A+ celebrity level. But I thought that was still a pretty kind of random but fun moment for me. If I hadn't been a golfer, I don't think it would have been a big deal, but to see Sergio in his green jacket 2 days after winning the Masters was a pretty cool experience.
So I know you're a big golfer. Have you ever hit a hole-in-one?
I have not, and this is a sore spot for me. So I don't have a whole lot more to say on that. Okay. Fingers crossed, every time out is a new opportunity, I suppose. I've been close, I think, on a handful of occasions, but have yet to jar one. So hope that is on the list here at some point in the near future.
I haven't either, so don't worry. So Jeff, thank you so much for joining me chatting Canucks, and then a little bit about yourself. I know you, like you said, probably have lots to do today, so I'll let you go, but thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you asking. And I like talking hockey, so it was fun to be on with you.
Well, perfect. Well, have a great day. All right. So I hope that everyone enjoyed that. I absolutely loved talking to Jeff about hockey, a little bit about how he got his love for hockey and more. So make sure to comment. Let me know what you guys thought of the video and of my conversation with Jeff. So I have been your host, Joshua Griffith, here on the Unnamed Sports Show. Make sure to love sports, all sports.